All right, good afternoon, everybody. We're really excited to present this webinar for you today called Fostering Clergy Capacity. Just wanted to discuss with you some of the innovative ways that Dakota Wesleyan has worked with the foundation and the conferences in the Dakotas and Minnesotas here in the Midwest to bring forward a fairly innovative program to help build clergy confidence and support. So we're going to tell you some more details about our program in just a minute and answer some questions about how we might collaborate with future conferences and foundations in the future as well. But we're going to begin today with a short word of prayer.
My name is Rebecca Treves. I'm the Director of Ministries for the Dakotas Conference, and if you would just join me in prayer. Lord God, we give you thanks for the gift of this day and for the gift of this technology that allows us to connect across the miles and to be reminded of our common connection and our common call to serve you through your church. And we thank you for that privilege. We thank you for the privilege of coming alongside pastors and churches and laity and helping them to grow in their understanding of stewardship, of discipleship, and of kingdom values. And so, God, we pray that right now you would guide our conversation, that your Spirit would move through the discussion, the presentation, the questions, and really, Lord, that you would guide us in how we can continue to most effectively serve you in the places you've called us. For it is in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Rebecca. So my colleague Rebecca introduced herself already, and we're going to continue with some more introductions here this afternoon. But to my left is Diane Owen. I don't know if she's on your left or your right, but to my left, she's Diane Owen, and she is with she's the Lilly Grant Director for the Dakotas and Minnesotas conferences of the United Methodist Church. Diane, do you want to say anything else about yourself?
Oh, I think I'll save it for a little bit later.
Okay, sounds good. And I'm Alicia Vincent. I'm a professor here at Dakota Wesleyan University. I worked with Diane, Sherry, and others to help create the nonprofit church leadership program in its current form. Also joining us by phone is Scott Mccurdy. Scott Mccurdy is a pastor, 30-year veteran actually, pastor in the Dakotas, pastors Spearfish United Methodist Church, and he's joining us by phone to share some perspective as a current student. So throughout the course of the next hour, Rebecca, Diane, Scott, and myself will just share some stories with you and talk a little bit about the logistics of the nonprofit church leadership program, how it works, the impact it has had so far, and again, answer some questions that you might have. I also want to take a note to recognize that Sherry Meister is not joining us today. She had a family emergency that took her away unexpectedly this afternoon, and so she's not joining us, but I'm sure she would appreciate it if you would keep her in your prayers throughout this day, her and her family in your prayers throughout today as well. So Rebecca is filling in. Rebecca has a lot of experience with this program, and she has seen a lot of fruitfulness from the foundation perspective as well. So she will be a great representative for Sherry today. So I'm going to start today by just giving you an overview of the nonprofit church leadership program, telling you a little bit about the logistics. And then after that, I am going to throw it to Scott, who will be talking about his perspective. Then again, Rebecca will share some insights from her perspective. She was both a student in the program as well as now working as a DS. And then Diane will fill in before we close with Q&A today. So a little bit more about the nonprofit church leadership program. And for your reference, I did post the entire NPCL impact report that we just recently published. So you can open that up when you get a chance. You can download it to your computers. You can look through the details there. There are a lot of really good details in that report. So if you missed something today and you want to dive a little deeper, I would recommend that read. I think it's really fascinating and interesting. You may have a different opinion, but that there will be some helpful information in that report that's attached. So just a brief overview of the nonprofit church leadership program. This program, like I mentioned, was created in conjunction with the Dakotas and Minnesotas conferences of the Methodist Church, with a lot of insight from Sherry from the foundation office as well. We're trying to solve the problem of how do we really tackle the confidence and capacity of our pastors and our clergy to be really confident and capable administrators in their churches. So really wanting to think not just about leadership, but also management and the goal being to really improve that level of confidence in a lot of really important areas that aren't normally covered in seminary programs. And so some of those content areas include things like financial stewardship, human resource stewardship, change management, conflict resolution. We cover communications and community outreach. We talk about strategy, vision, planning, evaluation, a lot of really technical topics that aren't often addressed in seminary, but that pastors often find themselves needing once they enter their churches and are having to serve, and many times as chief administrator, as well as chief leader, chief visionary, chief pastor, chief so many things. And so we really wanted to provide a program that addressed those areas for pastors. And so we worked hand in hand with Diane and Rebecca and other clergy that we invited to speak into this process. And we developed a 12-month certificate program that really focuses on those content areas. We really also wanted to make sure that the content was relevant, and thereby not just an online program that you go to, take classes, hear a lecture, complete a test, and you're done and you can move on. But this programming, we want it to be relevant. So as the pastor is learning something in our classroom, he or she is applying that to their setting. So it's immediate application, very relevant, very much so driven by what the pastors say they want to learn. It's also flexible and a hybrid program. So part of that development process was really being sensitive to church calendars, wanting to make sure that it's not just 8 hours a week of content that they have to try to tackle in addition to 4 weddings and a funeral. This is something that we wanted to make sure that was flexible for pastors so they can do it when they can do it, but it also keeps people accountable and on a track and in a system. So that hybrid format works really well for that. It's mostly online. We meet 3 times a year for just a couple of days. And that also builds that collaborative nature with these cohorts as well. They really like learning from one another. As Scott will talk about hopefully in just a moment, this program also represents a very deep dive into these topic areas. Again, ones that they might not get in seminary, but it is robust enough that we feel assured, and we are, because we're an accredited university, that this program is worth 21 graduate credits. So everyone who enrolls in this program can earn 21 graduate credit hours towards a master's degree. And that's really substantial. It's not something that you probably will find in a lot of programming out there that's this relevant and this targeted and this specific. And those 21 graduate credit hours represent something to us in the academic world, and we are an accredited university, so that's something unique that I think that we bring to this program as well. And if a pastor wants to participate in the program and they are, maybe not finished with a bachelor's degree, we have been flexible and try to adapt to some of those hurdles as well. But for the most part, most of the students who are enrolling are coming to us with a bachelor's degree and ready to tackle those graduate credits. Those graduate credits, like I said, can apply towards a master's. And so we have several students so far who've decided they want to go on for their master's. I'm trying to convince Rebecca to do that. And that master's then is just another 15 credit hours, and they can finish that within a year as well. This is a high impact program. The impact report that you'll see attached verifies some of those details. We've done our best to try to track data for that first cohort to make sure that we were meeting the outcomes that we set to meet at the beginning of the program. And I think the impacts are significant. We're still getting stories to this day. I just got a message from a pastor who's in the program right now who said, I've been trying for 5 years to get this thing to change in my church. And I started this assignment, and by the time I finished 5 days later, all of a sudden now this change is happening. Like somehow people got on board. So it's really fun for me, who's watched the evolution of this process, hear those stories as well. The other way that I think this becomes an high impact program is because it's coached. We have really vetted qualified coaches to come alongside pastors. So each of our coaches is partnered with a pastor in the program, a clergy, from the beginning of the program and to the end. And the role of those coaches is really helping them through those applied projects that they're doing in their courses and their significant applied project. Each pastor has to complete 2 major applied projects that are supposed to result in significant impact in their churches. Some pastors are choosing to do capital campaigns. Other pastors are choosing to overhaul their hiring process. Some pastors are choosing to rethink their governance structure alongside their leadership teams in their churches. And again, all of those applied projects are coached. So we consider them like process coaches in addition to cheerleaders. They're their best advocate to help them figure out how to get these things done. So it offers a level of accountability and assurance that they are able to apply the principles they're learning about in the classes. So I think that covers the basics and the overview of what the nonprofit church leadership program looks like for a pastor that's participating. You can also find a lot more information about that. There's some quotes from one of our current coaches on our website. It's dwu.edu/church leadership. I'll put that URL in the comments area of the chat window in a moment as well, but it's dwu.edu/church leadership. So now we're gonna, hopefully Scott is able to join us. Scott was having a little bit of technical difficulties with the connectivity in his South Dakota location, but I think Scott is joining us by phone, and I'm gonna unmute Scott. Okay, Scott, I think we can hear you. Scott, are you with us?
Fantastic. Yes, I am.
All right, Scott. Thank you so much for joining us. I'd already mentioned Scott has been a pastor at Spearfish United Methodist Church in Spearfish, South Dakota for a long time, and is a 30-year veteran of the clergy in the Dakotas. Thanks for joining us, Scott. Scott, we really want to hear from your perspective what you think is valuable about the nonprofit church leadership program as you're in your second course in the program, not even quite halfway through, but I know you have great perspective.
Yep. Well, we'll see how great it is here. So, yeah, I'm just having a really, really great time with NPCL. So much of this, since I graduated from seminary 30 years ago, oh my gosh, how do you effectively retool? And the things that we were taught in seminary, no matter how long ago that was, 3 years ago or 30, how do you stay current inside of this? And one of the things I have been really pleased with is that NPCL is working with some really practical stuff. Our very first class together is Financial Stewardship 1. And the biggest frustration for me in that class was, how do you take all of this information and implement it into a church? Because there was something in every single week that was going to help Spearfish Church if we could just figure out how to get that implemented in. So for me, the whole issue of this being high quality, master's level through accredited university to get that tough education. These are not easy classes. So the thing that immediately grabbed me inside of this is that this is the front end of that MBA. This is the real deal. And as part of that, one of the things that I discovered very quickly was that it's not just an MBA, it's a pastor's MBA. Everything in this course is designed to equip pastors. And I'm loving that. We're in the middle of our second big course right now, with human resources, stewardship with human resources. And with that, what I know is that all of this is so great in its applicability. One of the other things that I'm really struggling with right now is the fact that it has now moved me off of my status quo. And I'm not doing ministry as normal anymore because I'm in new territory. And it's very uncomfortable, and it's exactly where I need to be off center and moving into some very, very new territory, which can be very exciting. And with that, so the second thing that I really wanted to say with this is what it's giving to me is new tools for new situations. There's some stuff going on in Spearfish that we've never had to deal with before. How do I find those tools? And this is where I'm getting. And the third strength inside of this that I'm working with is the NPCL leadership team itself. They really understand the support that is needed to meet the challenge. For instance, this is the first time that I've done an honest to goodness, full-blown, real thing online class. And that was very intimidating for me. And it was really helpful to be able to have the leadership staff that were there that we could call, we could contact at any time to say, help me out with this. And we never had to feel stupid doing it. And I figured I'd be the only one with that problem. Nope, not by a long shot. So it has the relevance of this entire program has really, really been powerful for me. That it is giving me not just the continuing education that I need, but it is the relevant, pertinent, here are the new tools for new situations education that I need, with a support team that really is helpful and really making it work for me. And it's a huge amount of work, and it's really difficult, and it's a fantastic challenge, and I'm growing every single week where I need to be. That's what I got.
Scott, I am curious if you could tell us a little bit more about how you find the coaching experience. Tell us about your coaching experience.
Oh, coaching experience. Yeah. Every one of us is assigned a coach. And my coach is Nancy. And Nancy and I talk at least every 2 weeks. And she especially is giving me guidance on my large project. The large project that I've chosen is going to span the entire year, and it is all on developing a discipleship pathway within our congregation. We've never had a concrete discipleship pathway that we've used. So the relationship then is really huge. That Nancy is a professional who works in HR and in change techniques with Blue Cross Blue Shield. And coming out of the professional world, then she is able to sit down and to say, okay, now, have you thought about this? Right now, how is that going? And has been able to clarify quite a bit with me. The other part of that is just moral support to say, you can do this. This is normal. Yep, you're right on target.
So like Scott mentioned, all of our coaches at this point are really coming out of business and industry too. So these are people who are subject matter experts into the areas that we are dealing with, whether that's change management or financial leadership or governance. And so everyone who's a coach has a fair amount of experience and expertise in those administrative areas that they're trying to coach pastors with. They also are qualified, they also love Jesus, and they also care a lot about the churches and the health and wealth and viability of our churches in our rural and urban communities here too. So that is a unique feature for the program and something that we're very proud of, and so far has been working really, really well. Scott, I have another question for you. You have a couple of interesting stories. I know that when you were going through the financial stewardship course, our first of the 12-week classes, you did a project I remember getting an email from you where you said, this class has really opened my perspective. I'm having conversations with my financial person, and I know what I'm talking about. Tell us a little bit more about that meeting.
Well, one of the suggestions that came up that we had been exploring was how to do a narrative budget. And we just changed church financial officers. So we have a brand new church financial officer who is really experimenting and figuring out how does this work. She's awesome. She's amazing. But with the resources in the class, I was able to move past simply talking about technicality, which in the financial areas, I'm not strong on. And it moved me into a much more narrative, let me tell the story area of this that was so much more powerful. And she grasped that immediately. And she said, wait a minute, are you suggesting that we could do this in our church? And within a week and a half, it was to the printers. And it was amazing how that worked. We immediately then ran that up. We were able to use that in our stewardship drive, in that campaign, and immediately put that into effect with Charge Conference.
That's awesome. Thanks, Scott. Scott, any other final thoughts about the program or words of encouragement that you might have for people who are tuning in this afternoon before we move to Rebecca?
In 30 years of ministry, I have never seen one like this. If you want to stop ministry, if you want to go back to school full-time, or if you want to track down an online master's program, you can do that. But how many of those are going to be specifically designed and implemented for pastors on pastors' terms? This is the strength of what we're dealing with on this, and it's powerful. It's really, really powerful.
Thanks, Scott. We really value and appreciate your input today. And if anybody has questions for Scott, Rebecca, Diane, or myself, feel free to type those in the chat window. Rebecca is going to help me monitor the questions as they come in. We're going to take some time after Rebecca and Diane are finished sharing, and we will go through some of those questions during a certain segment of the presentation today. So now I'm going to move to Rebecca. Rebecca has been in on the program from the beginning. So she was in on conversations when we were developing. And then she said, you know what, I want to go through this program as a student, which was very intimidating for me because Rebecca's the director, was at the time the program director, now has been appointed as a DS. Also has a lot of experience. She comes from the Granager family, which is the longest lineage of clergy, I think, in the Dakotas. So it was intimidating for me, but I'm so glad she was a part of the process because her perspective was really helpful as we thought through the program and, again, wanted to make sure that it had the impact we wanted it to. So Rebecca's here to share that perspective, as well as she's working closely with Sherry, who's the foundation director, and she wants to offer some perspective from Sherry as well about the value of this and what the foundation is saying. So let Rebecca chime in.
So I'm really excited to be able to be a part of this call, in part because of having experienced it and seen it from several vantage points. As Alicia said, I'm actually still serving as the director of ministries, have been for 5.5 years, but in September I stepped into a role as an interim district superintendent as well. So I'm seeing and hearing stories from that vantage point, as well as from being in the first cohort as a student. So I'd say from that first vantage point of being in the first cohort, what I saw firsthand was the rigor of this program, that it was a master's level, that it required the discipline each week to take time each week, set aside, a half a day here and a half a day there to make sure of interacting. Not only are you doing assignments of maybe reading something, an article or a post or that, but you're also having the online discussions with your other classmates, as well as then putting something into practice. And that might be to develop a written assignment, or it might be to meet with the chair of your finance team, or meet with 2 people and practice doing an ask. And so, there's really sort of hands-on stuff as well as the theoretical foundation stuff that went to that. So both the rigor of it, but also the applicability. And what was also really interesting to see was how it applied to people in such different settings. In our first cohort, we had a pastor serving at a large church in downtown Minneapolis. We had pastors serving in suburban and mid-sized churches and communities, and we had pastors serving multi-point charges kind of out in the middle of nowhere. And then myself, who was serving as the director of ministries. And so we were able to take the assignments and make them work in our context and really put it wasn't this sort of theoretical thing that only works in this type of environment or this size church. And so that's what I really appreciated, not only for myself, but watching and hearing others learn from that. I would say then this next part of it was the vantage point as the director of ministries. Working in that role, I've had the chance to work with pastors in different congregational transformation processes where they've received coaching, or teams of people have come in to work with the congregation to help them discern next steps or prescriptions. And so I've kind of seen different ways of working with pastors and churches. And this program had such a unique combination of ongoing accountability, of stretching and challenging you, and also helping you think through with a cohort group how you're applying it. And so when I was kind of comparing that as sort of, I don't know if apples to apples exactly, because this was such a different approach to things. And yet what I saw is how some of the things that we have been trying to do with pastors and congregations through some of these other processes, this really helped it take root because of the style. I also, as director of ministries, what has been exciting is the ways that we have partnered with the foundation on this. And I'm so grateful to have Sherry as a partner and the ways in which she has led the foundation to really care about investing in churches and their ministries, and so that they're producing resources for ministry. And she shared a story that for her, I think she would say was like sealed the deal of the validity of and the power of this program and process, is that she had been to a church, a somewhat larger church, kind of early on before this, or kind of at this program was starting, kind of before it had really gotten going, and the pastor was going to be joining in that first cohort. And she was talking to the church about possible ways to handle their investments and to really grow their stewardship and their culture of generosity. And what she noticed is the pastor was really disengaged. He didn't say a lot. He didn't lead at all. He was just kind of on the outskirts. And so the committee kind of heard it, but just sort of waffled. Fast forward about a year and a half. He'd been out of the program for a couple of months, and she was back at that church. And what she saw was him partnering with her in the speaking to the church about how they could use the resources they have and multiply those and continue to develop stewardship in their congregation. And she said it was like night and day to see the change in him, about how he was able to piggyback and talk with Sherry and share with her in the presentation of why these are different ways in which to use to steward in your church. And so it was one of those things to where thinking about now they're partnering with the foundation and utilizing their resources, but it was because the foundation had really partnered with this process in laying the groundwork and giving this pastor that confidence and competence in that area. I'd also say that one of the things that we've seen with the partnership with the foundation is some of the elements of not only sharing the story and how understanding the vision and the core values of your church helps you tell the story, that inspires investment, as well as does the pastor now being a more confident and competent organizational leader. That people feel like, yes, I want to invest in this mission, in this vision, because I see that we have a leader who can help make it happen and feels confident in that. And so I think the ways, again, the tools and the ways that we've been partnering with the foundation, the way they come alongside our churches, this just has really made our pastors and therefore our churches really more engaged and effective partners in that way. And we've seen that. Again, I'm excited to see the ongoing ripple effects. We're starting to see it immediately in those churches, but I expect to see this ripple into the conference as well. And finally, in this role of interim DS, I'm seeing it in a different way too. I've had 2 charge conferences this fall, and both of those pastors had been a part of congregational transformation processes and had gone through a year long of coaching and training, and their churches had had their weekends and determined their prescriptions. One church had voted to accept their prescriptions and move forward, and the other hadn't. I think it failed by a couple votes. And in both of these places, they were advancing in powerful ways. On the one side, the group that had voted to approve, they had implemented all of their prescriptions except for the one around financial fears. And at that charge conference, that pastor got up and said, I'm in this class, and what it has shown me is how I need to be bold and fearless in leading all of us to not be afraid to talk about money. This is part of our discipleship. This is part of living out who God calls us to be. And to see that boldness in him of naming it, that they've been afraid to talk about and afraid to address it, even though they knew they needed to, and how this was now giving him some more tools and framework to do that. And in the other church where they hadn't voted to accept the prescriptions and had kind of been this little bit frozen in fear, what the pastor has done is in this class, she's been given tools of how to help them articulate the vision in their own language and lay out a strategic plan to implement it. And so and I always say this is because they're from out west and they're a little more independent spirit. They have to really come up with it themselves. But they did, and she's leading them to do that because of these tools and and the way in which her coach is working with her on that. And so it's just really to see both of these pastors and the way that they are blossoming. And again, I worked closely with them in these other processes and saw growth, but this is really to another level. And so I'm just so excited to share this. I mean, I could probably talk about it all day, and I should let Diane talk too. But I just, having experienced it and seen the fruits myself, I'm excited to be able to share this with others, and grateful that we have partners like the foundation who want to invest, who want to think about using scholarship dollars to scholarship students in this way, because this really is something, a next level, that from seminary to a next level of leadership and education that really, I think, is going to impact our churches in powerful ways.
Wow. Well, I think I'm glad that you were a last minute addition to this discussion today. On the one hand, but I hadn't heard any of those stories. So, and I think even though we have this impact report and it's posted in the chat window, and I'll give you a link later as well. But even though we did that, it's been amazing to me to hear these stories. I didn't know the part of Scott's story that he told about using that tool, and I didn't know any of this, and so we do what we can to collect evidence. But these stories of what's happening after, I think, demonstrate the power of the program too. And so, thank you for sharing. That makes me feel really good. We did something. Okay. And I want to again remind you that if you have questions for Rebecca, and she is representing some of the perspective from Sherry, although Sherry can answer emails about the process as well. I'm going to turn to Diane Owen right now. So Diane, as well as Rebecca, were instrumental in helping to formulate the parameters and lay the groundwork for the program. But Diane has been working hand in hand with me as the director of the program to make sure that she's the liaison with the conference. And so she does all kinds of things, from helping me think through curriculum to communicating with the conferences on what's working and not working. She talks to all of the students, all the clergy who are involved on a regular basis, to make sure that they're getting what they need to out of the program, and is helping us really monitor and ensure quality with this program too. So I want to talk to Diane, have Diane share a little bit about how she feels the program has worked, especially in this partnership, in this collaboration, really trying to promote the idea of let's do this together and not do it separately. So Diane, I'll have you share.
Sure. You guys have covered a lot of territory already, so this is certainly my perspective on why this program is needed now, and why Dakota Wesleyan University is the right university to partner with. We began this work because we really wanted to help our clergy and our churches improve their financial health and well-being, both personally and professionally. I mean, that was the foundation and the basic origin of why we would even start doing this. We learned through numerous clergy focus groups about the struggles our clergy were having personally and professionally. Rebecca talked about the transformational processes that she was a part of, and I was a part of many of the same in the Minnesota Annual Conference for 5 years, where we would encounter the struggles that our pastors were having around financial management, around human resources, how to even articulate a vision, and change management. That was not even in the conversation. And the list goes on. And we knew that we needed to address these competency gaps that we were hearing about. So we collected our list of competencies and tried to figure out, well, what do we do with this? I mean, we know that our annual conferences and foundations across the United States have capable, talented leaders who are designing and providing programming for our pastors in our churches. But we really felt we needed to take an extra step, because just that alone was not going to be enough to deal with all these competency gaps that we were discovering amongst our pastors in our churches. So where do you go? I mean, who do you talk to? Who could help us? And so immediately thought we need to partner with a university, higher education, where there are highly trained, educated instructors. There are sophisticated learning platforms, requirements for accreditation to ensure excellence, ongoing evaluation. This is where we needed to go. And we started thinking about this as a mini MBA. Well, is no surprise that the partnership with Dakota Wesleyan University and the Dakota's annual conference has already been in action for many, many years. They are literally across the street from each other, so that does help for sure. But they've partnered on other important ministries in the past. And so Sherry Meister and myself, we took up our long list of competency gaps that we felt needed to be addressed, and the emerging vision walked across the street, literally, and sat down with a group of leaders from Dakota Wesleyan. It was that simple, almost eerily so, and said, hey, this is what we need. Can you do this? We need someone to fill these gaps with these competencies and help our pastors, because we are in a different world today, as you all know. So we knew it would be fruitful. We've already had seen the results of the partnership in the past, but we were amazed at how quickly this program emerged and what was developed. It's important to realize that Dakota Wesleyan, many of you may have never heard of this institution. It's a smaller institution, but with that, you get a nimble organization, an organization that can adjust quickly, can adapt to new situations, and can take a problem and come up with a solution. And they did it. The institutional obstacles that you might find in a larger institution or university just simply were not there. So they took our vision, and well, Alicia's gone into detail as to what that program looks like, and Rebecca has talked about some of the stories and the fruits of the program so far. We are in our second year. I don't know if that's clear. We piloted the first cohort already. We have this innovative graduate level program. Dr. Vincent is responsible for creating and pulling together the program pieces to make this a rich, holistic approach to the stewardship of resources, not just financial resources, but all the things we've already discussed. And no surprise, evaluation is a high value. And I think that's something that is really important, and I cannot stress enough. Both our area, the Minnesota and Dakota's annual conferences and foundations, and Dakota Wesleyan value assessment and evaluation. And it happens regularly. So after every course, Dr. Vincent sends out an evaluation form to all the students, ask for completion, so that she can review and determine, do we need to make adjustments? And sure enough, in that first pilot year, adjustments were made into the next course almost immediately, whether it was content or methodology of how the coursework was being presented. Could have been just nuances that even the students might not have been aware of, but it was happening after every single course. A larger institution could not do that. So after the first year-long program, we sat down in focus groups and talked with the students about their experience, and they were very forthright. Can you imagine? Most pastors are, especially given that opportunity. And indeed, we learned there's some things we needed to do differently. And Alicia took charge, and we added an entire new course around communications and outreach, reconstructed other courses, changed some of the learning platform methodologies on how some of these content items were presented. And we did this because we wanted to make round two even better. I really enjoyed my conversations most recently. We have 24 students currently in this cohort. I called every one of them. Wanted just to ask a few questions to see how things were going. This took a lot longer than I thought it was going to take because they had a lot to share. They really welcomed the opportunity to talk about their experiences. Mind you, they gave me lots of corrective feedback too, and things that could be slightly improved, whether it's with technology or how they were learning. But they really affirmed their experience. And so some of the stories that I have heard do relate to confidence building. Every one of those students in some manner or other talked about how they just felt more confident in their delivery of information around financial stewardship, which was the first course. just being able to talk to their leadership teams. I had one clergy student who said, every time I hang up with my coach after a coaching call, I just feel empowered, stronger, affirmed, more confident to go and work with my church. And she's pastoring a very difficult church as a single young female in a very conservative older church who she really is often, how shall I say, the congregation is not always kind and willing to accept her as their pastoral leader. So she's learning to find her voice. And I think this coursework and this programming has really helped her here. Several, as Alicia mentioned, have already said, we know for sure we want to keep going. This is great. We want to complete our MBA. These are the lifelong learners who will probably, go for doctorates and such. But the fact that they're having such a good experience, I think really informs that this was the right match for our area to partner with Dakota Wesleyan. So this surge in leadership confidence, it was universal in my conversations. So I just want to kind of close my comments as a reminder, and I don't think we really, any of us need to be reminded, but today's culture really demands a different type of pastoral leader. Our pastors need to be continuously learning. They need to stay current, as Scott mentioned, and they have to do this in order to adapt to the changing world, to their changing church, to the church that needs to change. And no surprise, we're struggling with our own challenges within our denomination. How do we equip our pastors to deal with the change that is coming ahead? Regardless as to what happens, we want strong pastors leading churches into our mission. We want that no matter what. And we really believe this type of program is what is needed right now to better equip our pastors.
Thanks,
That's all I have.
I think I should preface that I'm not paying either of these people to
No,
talk about the
yes,
program.
She got a free bottle of water.
Yeah, free water. You're welcome. I thanks again, Diane, and it really has been a pleasure to work with Diane, Rebecca, Scott, and just the conferences in general in this program, and we're looking forward to what's next, hopefully with some other conferences. We're going to turn now to some question and answers. So if you have questions, please type them in the chat window. I have a couple of questions that I can see, and I'm going to go ahead and field. I'll let Scott respond. Scott, I'm going to turn to you in just a moment after I respond to a few of these questions, but there is a question directly for you, Scott, about time commitment. I'll speak to that, but then you can add on in just a moment. The first question I'm going to address is from Deborah. She said, I heard you say that most of the coursework is online, so I want to address that. We have, through Dakota Wesleyan, we have a learning management system called Canvas. It's very user-friendly, very intuitive, very easy to use, and that Canvas platform does allow us to do a lot of really unique things. So most of the content is shared asynchronously. So pastors can get on if they want to at midnight, which I have discovered that a lot of pastors, because I can see when they're on, a lot of pastors do their work after 10 p.m. at night. So it is pretty flexible for pastors to be able to get on and do things. However, a lot of the content that we are focusing on in the classroom, we're using relevant experts in the field. So we do a lot of live lectures on Mondays. So Mondays at noon Central is a time period that we've reserved for pastors to engage with their peers in a live lecture format, using Zoom as technology to do that. And so just this past week, Lance Witt, who's the author of the book High Impact Teams, was our guest lecturer. So we're talking about performance management right now in the units of learning that we're covering in my class that I'm teaching. And Lance came and offered some really great wisdom and perspective and some helpful tools for our pastors to think differently about performance management and the development of high impact teams. So that lecture was an hour. The week before that, we had a live group meeting, and we used Zoom to break out into small chat groups. So there were 5 pastors in each chat group, and we were covering topics related to committees and teams and what are the differences and how are those structured. So those are 2 practical examples of things that we might do on a Monday at noon. everything else in terms of the 12-week class and content is pretty much asynchronous, and you can do it whenever you want. So that's the question there. There was also a question, I think, about how many people are in a cohort. So we had 18 in the first. 24 is about the sweet spot for us. I think 24 is a good number. One of the most valuable things that we have found with the program is the opportunity for pastors to connect with one another. And we feel like if we get over the size of 24, that kind of relational dimension is maybe going to be a little bit lost. Deb is also asking a question about rubrics and competency models available for review. So we can share some of the course learning objectives. I'm happy to share more. Deborah, I'll post my email address later so we can correspond some more about that. But we are happy to share some of those, the course learning objectives and some of the things, the content that's covered in those courses. All right. So now Bill is also asking a question about cost. And I knew this question would come up too, and I'm sorry for not addressing it earlier in my session. But the price point for this is $7,000, and we know that can seem overwhelming, especially if a pastor is thinking about paying for this out of pocket. So what I would say about that is this is $7,000, but it's also 21 graduate credit hours. And you won't find any graduate credit program that you can receive 21 graduate credit hours for that price point. I'm going to challenge you to find something. Maybe it exists and I just don't know about it. But that would be very difficult to find. And it's 21 credit hours that you can apply towards your master's degree, which is also significant. I also would say that we have worked out some pretty strategic ways, and we're continuing to develop new models to help offset those costs for pastors. If a pastor does choose to go into the MBA program and enrolls in that way in the front end, then there is some financial aid available for the pastors to do that. We received Lilly funding to help support the pastors in this current round of the program through the partnership with Diane, and that was helpful. Now the foundation is stepping up to help support a certain number of pastors through this program going forward for the next several years. So the foundation is offered to scholarship pastors at a certain level. Pastors are contributing, I think, $1,000 to that tuition, and the churches are also contributing that amount to the tuition as well, because there is that return on investment for the churches themselves. So, okay, so now, Scott, I'm going to turn to you. I think I'm going to have you, I'm going to unmute your microphone, Scott. So you're unmuted now, and Scott, can you address the question that came about time commitment?
Yes, time commitment is serious. It's substantial, but it's not undoable at all. For me, because they have created a flexibility in the schedule, I will put in between 2 and 12 hours a week. The 2-hour weeks, those are the weeks when I'm up to my eyeballs in ministry, and it's a 2 or 3 funeral week, whatever, and I just have to take every shortcut I can. But with that, then, I have the ability to do catching up. So I would suppose, I think that the average that I put in is about 6 to 7 hours a week. And a lot of that I weave right into my normal day's routine. So I will do part of my work early in the morning as part of my devotions. And part of this with the online is that there are also videos and some of the TED Talks, things like that. Those are really easy for me to watch and to pick up in my morning routine. I also have figured out how to weave it into my daily routine. So there are times when I will take an hour here, an hour there at the office. And then, of course, there are the evenings. I try not to do late nights. They're just painful. But it's not undoable at all. However, you have to know going in that it is a substantial time investment. And your church, if you're working with a secretary or an administrator, they need to know that up front. So it's substantial, but very doable.
Thanks, Scott. And that brought up a good point. We do work with the churches before we even get started. So we do some survey work with the churches to help them speak into what needs they're experiencing in their churches. And that helps set the stage for the applied projects that the pastors are going to tackle based on that feedback they're getting from the leadership teams at the churches. And then we do some surveys, and we do really encourage pastors. The bishop sends a letter out letting the churches know what's going on and encouraging them to be supportive of their pastor and be willing to help, because there are a lot of applied assignments that require talking to leadership members or talking to church secretaries or whoever about things that are happening. So they are involved to some degree as well. Diane, there was a question about cost. I think let's address this again. The question is about subsidy from the foundation or Lilly. And I mentioned something, but if you want to talk about it from your perspective on the side of the persons who are helping recruit students into the program, what does it look like going forward?
Going forward, well, I mean, we are privileged to have a grant from Lilly Endowment that we were able to provide our pastors with scholarships. Although we did, as Alicia indicated, require that the pastor contribute from their own personal finances as well as had the church contribute. Going forward, and in anticipation of a follow-up grant, it will look different. The foundation will be partnering with this grant and supplementing it so that we will have the resources to scholarship our pastors once again. And then we are working on what I call a step-down process. For the annual conferences, it's step up, where they start absorbing into the apportionments the cost of the program that has previously been supported through our grant and through the foundations. It is our wish to actively seek, through the foundation's help, donors to fund this. We believe so strongly in this program that we believe that people will want to give to the education of the pastors in these annual conferences.
Yeah, and I would say from the conference perspective, that's where, even as we look at future budgets, that's why we're prioritizing this into the future as well, knowing, $7,000 is the price of it. So if somebody's just paying out of pocket, coming off the streets, it's $7,000. But we believe that this is an investment in our whole system. And so we want to keep coming alongside, and the foundation as well. I mean, that's our foundation is so supportive in looking at different creative ways to use some of the current funds they have, as well as identifying new funding sources, because again, we've seen the fruit of it and how that's affecting pastors in their confidence and their competence as leaders in the church. And so yeah, that's why we're prioritizing it as well.
Good question. This is a question, does this have any crossover with TMF or CLI?
TMF, Texas Methodist Foundation, I think it's Clergy Leadership Institute, and not that I'm aware of. I mean, I believe we don't have any. I know Sherry has conversations with them, but these two programs are separate.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. There's another question. Coaches involved in any of the coursework? Yes, so coaches, I mentioned we have guest speakers on Mondays. Most of the coaches have taken at least one unit of learning and have served as a guest speaker. Scott had mentioned his coach is a change management expert, and so she led a session for us and helped me with some of the content on change management in the course. And we do encourage pastors to cross-collaborate with other coaches. If I were coaching a student on governance, but they had a question about finance, then I would encourage them to talk to the financial expert that we have. So there's a lot of that cross-pollination of ideas in coaching as well. There's another question from Deb about statement that DWU is willing to bring the program to our area. I'm going to talk about that next. Thanks for the transition there, Deb. I'll get to you in just a moment. And then there was the final question I'll ask before addressing Deb's question is about MDivs and transfer credits. I wouldn't say we're unwilling to work on transfer credits. We haven't had that come up yet in terms of transfer. I do think it would work better, though, the other way around, to transfer some of this experience and some of the credits.
And that may be, I'm not sure if that's what you're asking, is if you're working on your MDiv, can you transfer these credits towards your MDiv?
I know that we are exploring some possibilities with Sioux Falls Seminary in doing some of that right now, being able to use some of the experiences in this program. We have one pastor who's currently in the program. She's in her MDiv program, and she's using the experiences in this program and getting credit for that in her MDiv as well.
So it probably, my guess, it would be worth talking, you'd have to work directly with the seminary to determine sort of what apples to apples comparison are. I know that's what we did with Sioux Falls Seminary. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks. And if you have more questions, we will follow up. And like I said, I'll post this, have Rebecca actually post our email addresses in the chat window right now while we finish up with these last 3 questions. So you have those. And then Sherry will also send a follow-up to everyone afterwards too. But I want to leave you with 3 invitations for our different audiences. I know we have people who are representing foundations, district superintendents, bishops, and also people who might be interested as students. So our 3 invitations are: 1, we are hosting a cohort that begins here on campus at DWU in July. Remember, we meet 3 times a year, and so our face-to-face meeting that kick off our program is in July. We still have 8 seats left in that cohort. If you are in the close geographic driving distance to campus, then you can communicate with me, or on dwu.edu/church leadership. You can see the link there to connect with our admissions person.
But I wouldn't let driving be the obstacle. We have a pastor who is in Alaska right now and who flies in, and willingly so.
Yeah, and he's doing a great job on the program too. So that's an option if you want to try it, or you might have a pastor or 2 who you want to send as your own pilot through the program. The second option, or the second invitation, if you want to think about bigger transformation, similar to what Rebecca was referring to and why they're committed to the program now, we can bring this program to your geographic region. So we try to get cohort sizes of about 24, but we are willing. With our first pilot, we were about 18, and if we can, in a specific conference, if there are 15 to 20 students who you think would benefit from this program, then I can have a conversation with you about how we can offer this program in your geographic location. That would mean that they would take part in our Canvas online learning management system, but we would recruit coaches from your area, because it's more beneficial for coaches being in those areas. And then I would work with the conference in that area to identify sites that we could do those face-to-face meetings. And again, it's just 3 throughout the year, and those are just a couple days each. So it's very doable to bring this program to your geographic location as well. And the final invitation, just echoing what Rebecca already said, would be for foundation leaders, bishops, district and superintendents to consider scholarships for students. I think that of course is a hurdle that can prevent some people from doing things. And we believe that the return on investment is significant. And we've seen evidence of that return, what they're getting in fruitfulness afterwards, even still is compounding that return for them as pastors and for their churches too. So those are my 3 invitations. Consider joining us on campus if you want to try it out. If you want to talk about bringing this to your conference, we're happy to do that. Or maybe there's 2 conferences together that would be interested in joining together. And then the final one is thinking about how you can get creative with scholarships and other funding to help make it happen. Rebecca, do you have any last minute thoughts?
No, I'm just grateful for all of you taking this time. It just shows your care and love for your pastors and churches, and looking for ways to continue to come alongside them. And so thank you for the work that you're doing.
And Diane?
And I'm certainly excited about this work and the fruits I've already been observing. And I think we are somewhat reluctant, but we must share it with those of you out there.
And Scott, do you have any last minute thoughts? Scott says it's great. Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you for your time today. It's been a slice of heaven, and I wish you all a very blessed Thanksgiving. Have a great day.